The Wasp Factory, Chapter 10, Running Dog, Part 2. When I lowered the glasses and put the Polaroids back down, I heard it. Something howled. Some animal. My God, I hoped it wasn't a human making that noise. Screamed in torment. It was a rising, anguished wail. The note produced only by an animal in extremis. The noise you hope no living thing ever has to make. I sat with the sweat dripping off me, parched and aching with the baking heat. But I shivered. I shook with a wave of cold, like a dog shaking itself dry from one end to the other. The hair on the back of my neck unstuck itself from the sweat and stood. I got up quickly, hands scrabbling on the warm wood of the house wall, binoculars bumping on my chest. The scream came from the ridge. I pushed the Polaroids back up, used the glasses again, bashing them on the bones above my eyes as I fought with the focusing wheel. My hand shook. A black shape shot out of the winds, trailing smoke. It raced down the slope over the yellow-spangled grass under a fence. My hands bounced the view around as I tried to pan the binoculars to follow it. The keen wail sounded over the air, thin and terrible. I lost the thing behind some bushes, then saw it again, burning as it ran, and jumped over grass and reed, raising spray. My mouth dried completely. I couldn't swallow. I was choking. But I tracked the animal as it skidded and turned, yelping high, bouncing into the air, falling, seeming to leap on the spot. Then it disappeared, a few 100 meters from me and about as much down from the ridge of the hill. I swept the glasses quickly back up and looked at the top of the ridge again, scanned along it, back down, back up, along again, stopped to stare intensely at a bush, shook my head, scanned the length again. Some irrelevant part of my brain thought about how in films when people look through binoculars and you see what they are supposed to be seeing, it's always a sort of figure of eight on its side that you see, but whenever I look through them, I see more or less a perfect circle. I brought the glasses down, looked about quickly, saw nobody, then sprinted out of the shadow of the house, leaped the small wire fence and marked the garden and ran towards the ridge. On the ridge, I stood for a moment, head down to my knees, gasping for breath, letting the perspiration drip off my hair and onto the bridge of my glass. And onto the bridge. No. Oh my gosh. Drip off my hair and onto the bright grass at my feet. My t-shirt stuck to me. I put my hands on my knees and lifted my head, straining my eyes to look along the line of wind and trees on the ridge's top. I looked down the far side and over the fields beyond to the next line of wind. You know if I'm saying that right. WHIN. Which marked the cutting the railway line ran through. I jogged along the ridge, head sweeping to and fro until I found a little patch of burning grass. I stamped it out, looked for tracks and found them. I ran faster, despite my protesting throat and lungs, found some more burning grass and a wind bush just catching. I beat them out, went on. Down in a small hollow on the land side of the ridge, some trees had grown almost normally, only their tops sticking out over the lee and the line of the small hills, leaned out from the sea, twisted by the wind. I ran into the grassy hollow, into the moving pattern of shade provided by the slowly swaying leaves and branches. There was a circle of stones around a blackened center. I looked around, saw a piece of flattened grass. I stopped, calmed myself, looked around again at the trees and the grass and the ferns, but could see nothing else. I went to the stones, felt them and the ashes in their circle. They were hot, too hot to keep my hands on them, though they were in shade. I could smell petrol. I climbed out of the hollow and up a tree, steadied myself, and slowly inspected the whole area using my binoculars when I had to. Nothing. I climbed down, stood for a second, then took a deep breath and ran down to the sea-facing side of the hills, heading across diagonally to where I knew the animal had been. I changed course once to beat out another small fire. I surprised a cropping sheep, jumped right over it, and as it startled, I bounced away, bang. The dog lay in the stream leading out of the marsh. It was still alive, but most of its black coat was gone, and the skin underneath was livid and seeping. It quivered in the water, making me shiver too. I stood on the bank and looked at it. It could only see with one unburned eye as it raised its shaking head out of the water. In the little pool around it floated bits of clotted, half-burned fur. I caught a hint of the smell of burned meat. I felt a weight settle in my neck, just below my Adam's apple. I took out my bag of steelies, brought one to the sling of the catapult as I unhooked it from my belt, stretched my arms out, one hand to my face where it was wetted by sweat, then released. The dog's head jerked out of the water, splashing down, then up, sending the animal away from me and over one side. It floated downstream a little, then bumped, caught by the bank, and some blood flowed from the hole where that one eye had been. Frank'll get you, I whispered. I dragged the dog out and dug a hole in the peaty ground upstream with my knife, gagging now and again on the smell of the corpse. I buried the animal, looked around again, then after judging the slightly stiffened breeze, I walked away a bit and set fire to the grass. The blaze swept over the last bits of the dog's fiery tail and over its grave. I stopped at the stream where I had thought it would, and I stamped out a few patches of stray fire on the far bank where a couple of embers had blown. When it was over and the dog buried, I turned for home and ran. I got back to the house without incident, downed 2 pints of water, and tried to relax in a cool bath with a carton of orange juice balanced on the side. I was still shaking and spent a time washing the smell of burning out of my hair. Vegetarian cooking smells came up from the kitchen where my father was preparing a meal. I was sure I had almost seen my brother. That wasn't where he was camped, I decided. But he had been there, and I had just missed him. In a way, I was relieved, and that was difficult to accept, but it was the truth. I sank back, let the water wash over me, and came down to the kitchen with my dressing gown on. My father was sitting at the table with a vest and shorts on, elbows on the table, staring at the Iverness Courier. I put the carton of orange juice back in the fridge and lifted the lid of the pot where my curry was cooling. Bowls of salad to accompany it lay on the table. My father turned the pages of the paper, ignoring me. Hot, isn't it? I said, for want of anything else. I sat down at the other end of the table. My father turned another page, head down. I cleared my throat. There was a fire down by the new house. I saw it. I went and put it out, I said, to cover myself. It's the weather for it, my father said, without looking up. I nodded to myself, scratching my crotch quietly through the toweling of the dressing gown. I saw from the forecast it's supposed to break tomorrow late sometime. I shrugged. So they said. Well, we'll see, my father said, turning the paper back to the front page as he got up to have a look at the curry. I nodded to myself again, toying with the end of the belt of the dressing gown, looking casually at the paper. My father bent to sniff the mixture in the pot. I stared, looked at him, got up, went around to the chair he had been sitting in, stood as though I was looking out the door, but in fact, with my eyes slanted towards the paper, Mystery Blaze and Holiday Cottage, said the bottom eighth of the front page on the left-hand side. A holiday home just south of Inverness had gone up in flames shortly before the paper went to press. The police were still investigating. I went back to the other end of the table, sat down. We eventually had the curry and the salad. I started sweating again. I used to think that I was weird because I found that the morning after I had eaten a curry, my armpits smelled of the stuff, but I have since found that Jamie has experienced the same effect. So I don't feel so bad. I ate the curry and had a banana and some yogurt along with it, but it was still too hot, and my father, who has always had a rather masochistic approach to the dish, left almost half of his.